My Doctor Said What is a program for health information. Be careful that if you want treatment and diagnosis of disease, you need to go to your local healthcare provider. This is Dr. Frank with My Doctor Said What? Episode 19 is about forensics. And today, with me, I have my good friend, sister-in-law, professional woman, and crime scene aficionado, Bree Tom. Hey, Bree.
Hi, everyone.
She is an expert. I don't know a lot about crime, but I know a little bit about forensics. So before we talk about that, I want to say and quote this from Steve Jobs. At 56, he died and penned this: "I reached the pinnacle of success in the business world. In others' eyes, my life is the epitome of success. However, aside from work, I have little joy. In the end, my wealth is only a fact of life that I have come accustomed to. At this moment, lying on my bed and recalling my life, I realize that all the recognition and wealth that I took so much pride in have paled and become meaningless in the face of my death. You can employ someone to drive the car for you, to make money for you, but you can't have someone bear your sickness for you. Material things lost can be found or replaced, but there is one thing that can never be found when it's lost: life. Whatever stage in life that you're in right now, with time, you will face the day, as I have, as the curtain falls. Treasure love for your family, love for your spouse, love for your friends. Treat yourself well. Cherish others as we grow older, like me, and hopefully wiser, and realize that a $3,000 or a $30 watch both tell time the same. You realize that your inner happiness does not come from the material things of the world. Whether you fly first class or economy, if the plane goes down, you go down with it. Therefore, I hope you realize when you have mates, buddies, old friends, brothers, sisters, those who you chat with, laugh with, talk with, sing with, talk about, that is true happiness. Don't educate your children to be rich. Educate them to be happy. So when they grow up, they will know the value of things and not the price. Eat your food as medicine. Otherwise, you will have to eat medicine as your food. The one who loves you will never leave you for another, because if there are 100 reasons to give up, he or she will find a reason to hold on. There's a big difference between a human being and being human. Only a few really understand it. You are loved when you're born. You're loved when you die. In between, you have to manage. The 6 best doctors, remember this, in the world are sunlight, rest, exercise, diet, self-confidence, and friends. Maintain them in all stages and enjoy a healthy life. Words of wisdom from a man far, far smarter than me. But this is about the dead, not the living. Think about this. There are 8 billion people on the face of this planet almost right now. But there's 111 billion people under your feet that have passed on before you. And we can learn some cool stuff from them. So, Bree, what questions do crime scene aficionados have that listen all the time to the great podcast, far more popular than mine? What are some questions you have from medicine?
So a big component of those happen to be autopsies. So I guess a question for you are, what are some findings that occur during autopsies that help deem a death suspicious?
An autopsy or a necropsy is when we look at someone. The first thing we do is look at the physical appearance. You can see things like trauma, there's bruising, if there's visible injury, if there's lacerations, gunshots, etc. First thing you look at. You record all this. It's about a 2-hour procedure, normal autopsy, an unrestricted one. We make a cut across the chest and down, usually in a Y, sometimes in a U, depends on how old school you are, and that's what pathologists do. And what we find is there's certain organs that you want to take out always. The brain is one. You want to take out the lungs, the kidneys, the liver, the stomach, and intestinal tracts. And if you can, you want some type of bone, like fingernails, you want hair, you want teeth if you can't get any other bone. And the reason for that is different toxicants, if someone's poisoned or if they have drug overdoses, are going to be in different compartments of the body that we're going to analyze.
Ah, that's very interesting.
Yeah. Well, in some you had mentioned earlier we talked about things smelling, and what did you ask about?
I asked about arsenic because I've heard a couple podcasts go over being able to identify that because I think arsenic, I'm not sure if that's something that's normally tested for, but it has an odor, and certain people can detect it and certain people can't. It has an almond smell, I believe, or something. I don't know if you've experienced with that.
Yeah, they the timer's confusing me, but I can say this. When you look at that, there's certain things that have certain smells, and usually it's in the breath, but you can smell it in certain organs too, like the stomach contents. Stomach contents are really important because obviously where you're poisoned if it's something oral, not an injection, which is how most people are poisoned. So, like you said, you could smell a garlic smell or a bitter root. Garlic, sweet smell of violets is like turpentine or an organic solvent.
No kidding. Okay.
Yeah, and you smell that more in the urine because we take out blood, urine where we can. Remember, this person's expired, so they're not pumping blood through them, but we can find in different organs, pockets, we get blood out of different veins. Pathologists then take these organs, we take the contents out of the stomach, everything's labeled. And then the organs, we do slices or kind of like biopsies.
Like a sample?
Yeah, make samples.
Okay.
And then look under the microscope, see if there's physical changes, which can be part of when you see cell walls burst, and that certain poisons will cause that versus other ones which will attack the DNA or the mitochondria. So that's one of the things we look at. What else does true crime people want to know?
Well, there have been tremendous advances in DNA, right? In DNA research and, I guess just what they can collect from a scene that helps to identify who the perpetrator is, or just help get more evidence. Mm-hmm. What are some types of DNA that can be found at a crime scene around the body that can be extremely valuable?
Now, if you're at the crime scene, which is fresh, which it's been within a couple hours, you can do a quick DNA test. The FBI uses that, Department of Justice, DEA, and those are kind of cool, quick turnarounds. You don't even need a lab, and it can tell you some things about who this person was. Some other things. If you want more detail, you have to there's 4 major types of DNA tests that you use for forensics. And I won't get into what they are right now, but they're 4 different, used for different purposes. The primary thing is to identify the human being, that is the person you think, especially if teeth are gone, the face is dismembered or just not defaced in any way. So you look at the DNA, and you can determine who that person is, but you also can determine a lot about cause of death. A lot of times you're looking at things that you think may be a crime that may be a natural cause. Someone may have had a heart attack while they were being robbed. Doesn't mean the robbery caused it. Or they could have been shot while they were being robbed, which that obviously was directly related. So DNA is really a great thing. It's become very useful. It takes longer than most people think, other than the fast DNA for certain things. The DNA to come back, be analyzed, takes about 4 to 6 weeks. 2 weeks is a quick turnaround. Okay. And it has to be a fairly fresh body, or you get DNA contamination because the organs degrade in that. So you have to think of things like bone in the teeth or fingernails. If you want to look at drug overdoses where the body's decomposed a lot, you look at fingernails or hair. Or arsenic in the hair too. Oh. Everything else you're going to find in the kidney and the lungs, because that's what kind of most of what changes and metabolizes things in your body. So you should find the actual substance that killed them, whether it was an overdose or a foreign substance, that you should find that, or the metabolite of that, in those organs. So that's where we look.
Okay.
We do chemical analysis as well as the slide preparation to look at physical analysis of that tissue.
Ah. How long is that kept for? Like those records?
Yeah, if it's a crime, you're going to keep them until you're finished with a trial or the crime is solved. And that could be a long time.
Years, yeah.
The great thing about DNA, certain types of DNA, are good for 150 years. So
that's incredible.
Yeah, that's good. But the big problem you have with DNA on most scenes is contamination. And that's why people rope it off, try to be careful, use rubber gloves, because you're shedding DNA all the time. And so then you have a jumble that we have to unravel like a big puzzle, and that makes it tough.
Makes sense.
And that's what defense attorneys use many times, is how do you know in that jumble that it was really this?
Right.
So what else? What else do true crime aficionados like to talk about.
I would say you've covered the majority of items that, I think everyone's looking at: DNA and autopsies and findings. I guess potentially placement of the bodies. So I guess pooling of blood and things like that, right? The way you can find a body, like how can blood pooling tell you more about a particular death?
You can find a lot about not only cause but time of death, because the body goes into rigor mortis over about a 12 to 15 hour period. And then it starts to actually become less rigored over the next 48 hours. So we know by the rigor in the first few days where our approximate time of death. The problem is then you have blood coagulating and things like that, which make it more difficult to sample, and it starts to degrade. Obviously, as soon as you die, things start to go the other direction. So that is one of the beauties, as you mentioned, of DNA. We can look at something that's not affected by that kind of degradation in certain long-term tissues like bone,
right, or
some of the other organs. And you can find some cool stuff just by physical examination. If someone's strangled, and say their hypoid bone is intact, you can see marks a lot of times.
Okay.
If they died quickly, sometimes you don't get bruising, but you can find impressions where they push so hard. But the other cool thing is, if you look at their eyes, the small vessels in their eyes will always be broken from that. And then you also usually find, pressure, because not a great way to die. Right. Also, you'll usually find signs of a struggle, which we always look under the fingernails and that to see if they have DNA from someone else.
Okay.
So physical examination is really important. One thing that is sad is we used to do autopsies on almost 50% of all deaths.
Oh, I didn't realize it was that high.
Used to, and until 1970, you couldn't accredit your hospital or your institution without doing a certain number of autopsies. Then, sadly, the insurance companies got involved. Now, unless it's a crime or there's a reason, a sudden death, to have an autopsy, the family has to request and pay for it. So, and it's not a cheap endeavor. It's several $1,000s depending on how extensive it is. You can do just one section. If you feel pretty comfortable as a drug overdose, just look at the brain and look at the kidneys, and you can usually figure out time of death, stomach contents. And you can find some cool stuff, like if there's a lot of opioid in the stomach, but you have not enough in the blood yet that they would have killed them, then somebody came in and strangled them or did something else while they were unconscious.
There's an additional component involved.
Additional component. So you have to put all those pieces of the puzzle together. And with that, I want to say I thank Bree for being here. She tells me some interesting stuff all the time. I've been fortunate enough to do a lot of autopsies and be involved in them for DOJ and DEA, and some stuff is not what you would think. So it's pretty cool. So anything to say in closing, why is true crime so fascinating to most people?
I think it's a puzzle, right? So I think you're trying to get different pieces and trying to solve a puzzle. And I think that it's most satisfying when that puzzle is solved, and from my perspective. And it's just how all the different pieces come together to be able to get to the resolution, so that, especially if there is a crime, that the perpetrator does get held accountable for it. So, but I think it's the problem-solving component.
And what makes a great true crime podcast?
I would say one that's told from just the facts, right? That doesn't have a biased opinion, that presents everything, what the findings truly are, what the detective's perspective are, what the defense attorney might bring up, so that there's a counter to it, and then some type of resolution.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm never going to go into true crime, but this is fun. It's fun for me, and I learn a lot. So I can tell you, remember to watch Dr. Frank. My doctor says, what? To explain to you complex health matters in a simpler way. And we wish you best health. And remember Steve Jobs' 6 best doctors. Have a great 2023 and 24. And you can find Dr. Frank on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and all major platforms. Have a great day.
Bye.
Remember, send your comments and questions to Dr. Frank at mdswpod@gmail.com.